Welcome to the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. This is your host, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, helping business owners create financial freedom faster by mastering the language of money. Want to see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom? Complete our 40-point financial performance scorecard at wealthhealthcheck.com.au. That's wealthhealthcheck.com.au. The average score for most business owners is 18 out of 40. So complete the scorecard now and see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom. G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. I'm super excited about this episode because it's a dual purpose episode. I wanted to get Jordan and Joey from Game Plans so we can do a deep dive into property strategy. And it's not quite what you guys think. There's a lot of people talking about property strategy, but these guys are basically the godfathers of property strategy here in Australia and have essentially cornered the market in terms of helping more Australians than any other platform generate a real strategic property plan that gives them real peace of mind and certainty about creating financial freedom. And we're going to utilize this podcast as research for my upcoming book, which is all about helping 7- and 8-figure business owners create financial freedom through property. So Jordan, Joey, thanks for joining us. How are you guys doing?
Mate, thanks for having us. It's super exciting to be here. I always love coming on these and having chats with you. And then excited about the book, mate. I've read a fair few of yours. I haven't been through all of them. I will get through them, and I'm going to get through the 100 when you get there as well, I promise. But mate, excited to be a part of your next writing.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
mate.
and on the back of Geordie, mate, super pumped to be here and to give you and the listeners some insight in terms of what we're seeing day in, day out at Game Plans.
Yeah, and look, guys, we practice what we preach. So to put it into context, Joey actually facilitated my latest iteration of my property growth strategy and has actually been working with me and our buyer's agent, Josh from Tradeview Property, to help us implement that. So this is tried and true stuff that we're drinking the Kool-Aid. So I'm excited to get stuck in. So Jordan, let's start with you, mate. Let's go straight for the uncomfortable truth. Like there's lots of people who are buying property without a strategy. They actually have more of a wish list. They want capital growth, they want cash flow, they want passive income in retirement, but they've got absolutely no idea how they're supposed to sequence it. So mate, you've observed this every single day. Like, why do you feel the industry is still producing property buyers as opposed to property strategists? And what does that cost the average investor in the long run, mate?
Yeah, it's funny you pitch them that way because we find our most successful buyers agents are actually property strategists first and then buyers agents second. And the reason I guess the industry is still producing them is if you think about the transaction, there's the sales side, which is a real estate agent. Now, is a real estate agent really going to plan and build out your portfolio for you? No. And if the other side is a buyer's agent, they go and buy a property for you. Again, a transactional in and out. But with a property strategist, you're not just looking at it from a transactional point of view. You're sitting down, instead of looking at a property transaction, you're thinking about a client and their long-term journey. And so where this impacts people the most is a client will come to a buyer's agent and they'll say, great, I've got 750K to spend. I like these particular areas. The buyer's agent will go, great, 750. I know one agent in this one particular area who will get us a really good deal. This is comfortable and safe for everyone. Everyone's comfortable with this. It's easy. It's a solution. Let's go and do that transaction, get it across the line. It's simplified and happy days. Everyone's happy. Win-win. Client comes with an agenda. We sort that agenda and we're good to go. But is that 750K property in that particular region actually going to achieve what the client wants out of their portfolio long-term, big picture, or is it going to hinder it? And what we mean by that is actually just understanding what you want out of your portfolio over the long run. Do you want to, is the goal to retire as soon as possible and have some cash flow coming in? Is it to build generational wealth for your kids and the next play and what that looks like? And so there's lots of different types of properties that we can buy at that 750K range in many variables in different areas across the country. And so what we want to do is instead of going, I've got this purchase price and I like this area, we go, this is what I want to achieve and this is where I currently am in my current asset pool and where I want to go. Where does this next purchase fit into that 10, 20, 30-year plan rather than right now it's easy. I know my mate John who buys in Newey. Let's go get a deal done.
Yes, I get you. And it's interesting, right, that the market pressures have forced the participants to play this way. And as we know, that's not the way that long-term wealth should be built. So we've got to lay the foundations here, mate. So for those who don't know what game plans is, do you want to give us a crash course on like what have you created? What does it do? Who uses it? What problem does it solve?
Yeah, so we work with about 550 businesses. Last time I checked, probably 560 now. We've seen 11,000 portfolios, like individual different portfolios. And the best way to explain what we do in kind of layman terms is we completely change the way that we've thought about building out a property. Instead of starting with where we are now, what our asset pool is now, what's our income, what's our borrowing capacity, what do we go buy, we actually start with the end in mind. So the first thing we ask you is those things that I was just saying before. What is your goal? What is your outcome? What is your time horizon? And we get that number, we go, okay, it's 150K in 17 years. Inflation adjust that, it's actually 230K. And then we reverse engineer that back to today and go, well, what do we have in the portfolio compared to where we need to go? We reverse it back into today's numbers. And then we go, okay, actually, these are the steps that we need to take along that journey to be able to get there. It's not just a like, let's go buy, let's go buy, let's go buy. It's actually thinking 3 steps ahead. It's like playing chess instead of checkers. Like checkers is fun. We can hop over and go to the next one. But when we play chess, we're actually thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. How can we make the right best move now that might be contradictory? It might actually not make any sense to us right now, but in 2 or 3 moves down the line, it all kind of pans out and is actually the best move to win. So we try and think long-term, big picture, reverse engineer that and map the portfolio out over 10, 20, 30, we even go 40 years now, over that journey, rather than just thinking, okay, I've got X, Y, and Z, let's do X, Y, and Z.
And mate, it's a really elegant solution. Like not only is it a phenomenal tool, but it's actually really pretty and easy to use. And it's interesting, like financial advisors have been doing this kind of work for decades, right? Like the foundation of strategic financial advice of working with our clients is doing exactly what you've described. But most financial advisors completely exclude property as an asset class. Like in that modeling, it's always like paying off debt, investing in the share market, putting money into super, because as we know, there's a gap in the Corporations Act and the financial advice industry that property, residential property or direct property is not a financial product. So therefore, advisors can't really give advice on it. And then on the flip side, you've got to be a real estate agent to give advice on it, but advice isn't really part of how the industry is operated. So it's like sophisticated people have been caught in this big gap, and I think you guys have absolutely nailed it.
Yeah,
So
and I think we've kind of had an update on that as well. We've kind of had a really good update recently because there has been some stick and some kick up in the industry, which is needed. Like I think it's really, really needed. And so just to clarify for everyone that's listening, what we've been guided as advice around the whole property/financial product thing is buying property in your personal name is not financial advice. It's like it can be a principal place of residence. Therefore, it's not always going to be a quote unquote investment, and you're safe from that standpoint. But if you are buying property in an entity, which might be a company, a trust, self-managed super fund, those entities in themselves can be deemed and determined as a financial product. So steer clear and be very, if you don't have a financial license, just be very comfortable with talking about property in a personal name, but don't include other entities because they can be deemed as a financial product.
really good clarification. And it's definitely a grey area because like I'm sure you guys have seen, I see every day on social media, there's buyers agents that are talking about bucket companies and special purpose vehicles and all of this stuff, and it's very much blurring the line between tax advice and financial advice. And look, I think we can all agree there needs to probably be more regulation and there needs to be
100%.
more consumer protections. But ultimately, what we need is we need more clients who are getting strategic advice that fast tracks their path to achieving their goals. So, Joey, that's a good segue to you, mate. Like you facilitated my game plan session when I was developing my property strategy with my buyer's agent. Do you want to give us a kind of a run through of like what does a game plan session actually look like in practice? What gets modeled, what gets mapped,
Yep.
and what does the client walk away having achieved as a result?
Yeah, so we start out by assessing the existing portfolio. It's a really good opportunity to understand the client, their journey, where they've come from, ask them how they feel about the performance of some of their assets. I'm probably going to touch on this a little bit later on, but there's some great news stories and there's also some horror stories in which we've seen in some people's portfolios with respect to existing assets that they have. So having a deep dive, having a review in terms of where the numbers currently sit, and then basically what Geordie was saying, it's then modeling out and running multiple different what if scenarios. So we can even take, for example, someone's had a conversation with their broker and they've got 1.2 million of capacity. Well, do we go and spend we go and buy 1.2 mil asset, or do we cut that up into a couple of smaller properties? What are the pros? What are the cons? What if we applied a growth rate of X to the $1.2 million property and growth rate of Y to the other two? And obviously the rental yields would change according to those purchase prices as well. So essentially taking what the clients have as inputs and then working with their advisors, working with their brokers, working with their buyers agents to then chart out a path for them moving forward, so they have really crystal clear clarity, at the very least, behind what this next acquisition looks like, but also thinking, like what Jordan said, one property ahead, two properties ahead, to understand the knock-on effects. Classic example, and I'm not making this up, this was a call that I had earlier today. I was speaking with a young doctor who's going through this period of, he's currently a locum at the moment, so earning really strong income. He will be kind of converting back to a permanent residence where he won't be earning the high income as a locum next year. And then in 6 years' time, his income's going to double when he graduates with whatever he's going to graduate in. So the fluctuations in terms of income were drastic, and he was wanting to be really strategic in and around maximizing capacity while he had it as a locum, factoring in the lower cash flow for the next 6 years while he had the lower income. And then when the capacity bumps back up again, ready to continue that investing journey. And that's why it is so down to the individual. Like it baffles me that people think you can just take an off the shelf approach and apply it to every client. Like and we see this day in, day out. There are no two clients are ever the same. So then being able to model out with that individual and obviously all the individuals around, okay, this is what this next purchase looks like. And then importantly, what is the roadmap ahead? What does the acquisition after that look like? And then is there a consolidation period? Are we selling any assets down to then divest to reinvest, or is it a simple buy and hold? Understanding the client's risk appetite. Is there potential with any of the assets in the portfolio to add value? And how does that impact the story? Are we adding in an owner occupier? And how does that fundamentally change the numbers for the individual so that they can walk away with something tangible? Obviously clarity around this next acquisition, but also comfort in terms of understanding, okay, this is where I'm going to next. And also relief at the same time, going, okay, well, if my goal is X, I don't need to go and buy 48 properties. I can have 5 in my portfolio, which is a lot more attainable and a lot more realistic for them.
Makes sense. And there was a big point that you had there, is obviously that clarity and confidence, which I suspect changes the decisions of the client, right? So can you guys maybe share a bit of clarity of like, what's the contrast between maybe buyers agents who weren't using game plans and were going straight to the deal versus now using game plans to develop the strategy and then going to the deal? Like, what happens to the speed of decisions, or maybe even the indecision of their clients in contrast?
Yeah, 100%. So what we have seen essentially with the people who have implemented game plans is they now have this kind of new role within their business of a property strategist. And it's kind of like a client success manager. Like they kind of help you every step of the way through. And so people who weren't using, or if they weren't using game plans prior, they'd kind of, usual process. Lead would come through, they'd go through the sales process, they'd have an onboarding call, all the nice fluffy stuff, send them kind of like, just get a high level understanding of what they're after, send them the research reports. Once research has been confirmed, we then go and source the property, do the negotiation, hand over, and then it's like, wipe my hands clean. Thank you very much, Mr. Lead. On to the next lead. It was a very transactional process. Now what we see is they become, their long-term property partner. It's their strategist. Their strategist helps them actually understand what they want, because some people don't even know what they want, right? Like they need to understand themselves. They've kind of heard from Uncle Greg at the barbecue that property's cool and we need to get into property. And so it's about understanding, okay, we know property's cool and it works and we've seen people be successful, but what do we actually want out of this thing? Like, where's it going to get us? What's our goal? And so they step with you all the way through. It's no longer, you're not working with like, a client success manager on the way in, and then you're working with a buyer's agent who's doing the negotiation piece, and then you're working with, prior to that, a research guys doing the research. They hold your hand all the way through. And once you get to that post-settlement period, it's no longer wipe your hands clean. It comes back and it's just like, okay, let's add that property back into the portfolio, see how it's impacted your portfolio over the long term, see where it's going to take you now. And then let's catch up again in 6 months or 12 months and actually be your long-term partner in building out your portfolio, not just a lead that's coming through the door and be transactional and get this done. And I think it really changes that whole kind of client experience. If you think about, the best way I can kind of articulate this is, if you think about like taking Uber compared to having like a personal driver. Like you know you need to get from A to D, right? And if you take an Uber every time, you're going to go from A to B and the experience might be good. Then you're going to go from B to C and you might get in the car and it might smell a bit or something might be wrong. And then you might go from C to D and like, they didn't, open the trunk for you to put your bag in or whatever it might be, or they might go on a detour or something like that. Like you just don't know the experience that you're going to get for every transaction. It might be different. Some you might, some you not. When you have a personal driver that has worked with you for years and understands you, knows what you like, knows that you like the door opened, like that you get dropped off in this particular area, knows what size luggage you're going to have, so they've got the right storage for you. They become your long-term, just both ways you're going to get from A to D. It's just that the journey along the process is going to be a whole lot smoother, and they're going to understand you and know you and what you want, rather than being questionable and having maybe weird conversations with every single driver. You're going to have the right conversation with articulated information and someone who knows you along that entire process. So, it's having someone who offers game plans just allows you to understand you a whole lot more, rather than just like jumping from A to B to D to C to D.
Yes. And I think that's the fundamental difference between transactional and transformational, right? This is how we get compounded results of having the strategy first and being able to sequence things to get the best possible outcome. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, guys, let's talk about the model and the numbers behind the model. As we know, we can put in whatever numbers that we want and we can make it look really sexy and it pats the ego, or we can be realistic. And like my personal philosophy is like I prefer to under promise and over deliver and be super conservative. So can you talk us through like what are some of the key variables and assumptions that you make when you're doing a model to strike that balance?
It's really cool. It's actually, there's only like three really simple things. And trust me, like we started with 141 questions when we onboarded. I think we have something like 42 assumptions that you can change and play around now with the system. And I think, we've done some cool things. So, you might talk about growth rates or rental yields. And where people might go wrong is they might put like, a really high growth rate at like 10% or something like that. Like we've constrained the platform. We've seen people put like 15% in. We've constrained the platform now to only maximum you can put in is 9%, which still is quite high, but it's good to have some constraints around that. But, all well and good, all things said, you can make things look amazing and like you're going to change the world and become a millionaire overnight. But I think the three things that it comes down for everyone is firstly, savings or borrowable equity. So without having savings to begin with, unless you've got like the bank of mum and dad, it's really hard to get into the property market. Like it's very hard to save at a fast rate and the market's going to grow, right? So you want to have a chunk of savings. And if you use things like the 5% government scheme and everything else like that to help you and leverage you get in, or bank of mum and dad, go for gold, stepping stone property. That's the most important thing. Once you get into property number one, you're going to have, again, a combination of savings plus borrowable equity now, which is going to help you invest a whole lot faster. So how much savings or borrowable equity we have available is what is going to underpin what this next purchase is going to look like. As a rough general consensus, especially after you're done on the first property, I like to have about 26% as a deposit. Now, 26% seems like an odd number, but essentially what we're talking about here is 20% for the purchase and then 6% for purchasing costs. And that might include stamp duty, building and pest conveyancing, everything else like that. So really that's kind of where we start, right? And so we go, okay, if it's like, let's say it's a 500K, let's say it's $1 million property, 26% is 260K. Again, if it's a 500K property, you're looking at about 130 grand. That might seem like a lot of money for people that are buying a 500K property. And again, you can use other government grants or banks, mum, dad to get there, but that's kind of like where we like to start. That's the first. The second thing is borrowing capacity. So it's cool that we might have 260 grand to buy $1 million property, but will the bank lend us $1 million? Most household incomes on 200K can borrow up to about 1.2. So, you can, you generally can buy that $1 million property. But again, is just because you can buy that $1 million property, is that going to be the best decision for you? What if the $1 million property is going to cost you 30 grand a year out of pocket? Can you afford that? And that leads us into the third thing, which is cash flow. So again, we want to understand, what are our savings at? Can we actually borrow? What's our borrowing capacity left, like either to buy or continue buying? And then what's our cash flow? That's point number 3. So is our income going to be able to sustain a heavily negatively geared portfolio? what we can do on the platform is then see what happens if we increase interest rates by 2%. So if we go from negative 30 grand to negative 45 grand, like how's that? Are we still going to be able to sustain in that worst case scenario? If not, let's be a little bit more conservative. Let's look for something that a little bit higher yield, a little bit more cash flow coming in, and maybe, we're comfortable at negative 15 grand a year. We can contribute, $1,200 a month towards this thing, and we're quite comfortable from that. And that's all dependent on the economy, and the economy changes. It's all a point in time. Like rental yields change over time. That's why I hate like assessing each individual property kind of as a snapshot, because rental yields can change over time, interest rates change. And so, what we could buy, 2-3 years ago, almost everything in the market was at least cash flow neutral or somewhat positive. Now we're in a higher interest rate environment. It's going to be harder to find those cash flow positive purchases. So the three main constraints is savings of borrowable equity, borrowing capacity, and can we sustain this from a cash flow perspective?
And then when we're looking at Jackson, when we're looking at the portfolio, right, I always like to look for what is going to be your most immediate blocker, because it's usually going to be one of those three things. For lots of investors, especially ones who already have one property in the portfolio, it's probably going to be borrowing cap that's going to stop them, because if they've got a property, if they bought the property over the last 5 years, throw a data up, or it's probably grown in value. So they've probably got equity. They've probably got that deposit for that subsequent property purchase. And it's usually going to be borrowing cap, but it may not be for some individuals. So we always like to look for what is going to be your most immediate blocker, and then potentially come up with a solve for that. So if it's, for example, cash flow, the negative cash flow position is just something that we can't tolerate, even though we could afford to go and buy another property. Well, what are the strategies? What could we lean upon? Well, we can go and have the conversation with our mortgage broker around changing from a P&I loan to an IO loan to help you from a cash flow perspective for a season. We can talk about sinking a higher cash deposit into the next property purchase to reduce your loan amount. Or like Geordie said, you can go out there and chase an asset that is delivering you a little bit more cash flow. So it's really pivotal. And we do this every single session, identify what your most immediate blocker is that's actually going to prevent you from scaling.
And I think this is the fundamental difference between this strategy for like the typical Australian who might be PAYG, household income of 200 grand, and a 7 or 8 figure business owner. Because obviously businesses who have that amount of operational leverage, they can pull more levers to influence those outcomes, right? Like a business that does 5 mil a year, that goes from a 10% profit to a 20% profit, well, they're going to save that deposit potentially in months, right?
Yep.
They can distribute more income, meaning that they can service more debt. And of course, that cash flow buffer allows them to hold a more significant negatively geared portfolio for longer. Because I think that in my experience, the biggest enemy to allowing property to compound is your ability to hold those properties at negative cash flow. And I'm sure we all saw through that last interest rate cycle, there was a lot of people in a world of pain who thought that interest rates were never going to go up, right? And they were over leveraged. So the extension to that, guys, is like, you not one time did you just say, oh, it's about the kind of the superficial things of the property. It's like getting the making sure the kitchen's right, or making sure that we're kind of picking the next growth spot, right? Like, am I right in saying that through looking at the portfolios that you have, the difference between the winners and the losers doesn't come down to that tactical stuff that I guess most lay people think is what moves the needle?
100%. That's all a point in time now. It's a snap. Like any data on a property is just like right now, even the renovation stuff. If you go and drop, if the kitchen's not great and you go and drop 10K on a renovation, if you were to get refinanced and someone's not even looking at the inside, they're just doing like a desktop valuation, how are you going to know that you spent 10 grand in value the property then immediately? So 10 years later, guess what? You might need to do the kitchen again. So yes, it's nice to have a new kitchen for tenants if it's terrible and, you want to maybe increase the rent a little bit and get a decent return that way for sure. But, these metrics and numbers are all just kind of a snapshot in time right now. They don't help you think that 10, 20, 30 years away. And in fact, I would even try and stick away from understanding, well, what's the next best like hotspot going to be? Because generally what we've seen, and again, we get to work with some of the biggest and best buyers agents in the country, which is great. And we get to see this data, is when a suburb or an area is starting to appear in research reports or on the tip of everyone's tongue in forums and everything else like that. Generally, it's already too late. Generally, the data is lagging and it's being assessed and people have seen it before. Generally, though, if it's starting to have all this little growth, little spurts, well, guess what? That's investors coming in and already buying in there. And so when we see like these next best, biggest hotspots, you kind of need to be 6 to 12 months early getting in before everyone else does. And then it starts to become this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because in a span of 6 or 12 months, you might have like 10, 15% growth, and everyone sees that and says, oh my God, it's going to continue at this rate. But when we see suburbs or areas grow at a disproportional growth rate compared to the average, and the Australian average is 6.8% over the last 30 years, all that's really happening in those markets is you're bringing growth forward. So instead of having, let's call it 7% growth for 3 years, you might have, 7, 7, 7, you're bringing 15 forward, then you might have a little growth spurt of, let's say it's 15 again the next year, but all you've done is really brought 3 or 4 years worth of growth forward, and you might have a period of 5 or longer years where there is no growth or stagnant growth, unless there's an underpinning drive or demand for that area where there's actually people with high incomes moving and living in that area. Then it makes sense. So look at like the demographics and the economics of those local areas. But if it's just investors going into an area that are investing outside of that area with higher incomes, for example, people living in Sydney investing in Darwin, but there's no underpinning reason for people investing in Darwin. It's just outside investors coming in. It's almost like a bit of a pump and dump scheme. So, yeah, I would always just be careful at looking at data, looking at individual property, looking at how that individual property is going to happen. Joey had a really good point before around, manufacturing equity. That's definitely a strategy if you're looking to add value, not just a kitchen, but maybe adding significant value and pulling out 50 to 100 grand to go again. That's definitely a strategy. Or adding a granny flat if you want to have some cash flow again, that's definitely a strategy. But when you're looking at like just a lick of paint and, yeah, dressing up, putting lipstick on a pig as they call it, it doesn't necessarily change the fundamentals of a property.
No, no, I agree with that. Like my whole philosophy is we want to buy good quality blue chip property that has the fundamentals to perform over the long term. It's like, how do we buy an asset that we have no intention to sell until we reach our goal? Which for me is like build a compounding asset base that allows me to rinse and repeat and roll over 100% of my capital without tax every year until I reach a point where I want to convert that into income producing assets, which is going to be by 20 or 30 years down the track. That's the kind of lens that we need to look at it through.
And that's really beautiful, and it's really fitting that you mentioned that exact example, because we had a client very recently that comes to mind where this is their reality, and we were fortunate enough to work with them and their BA over a number of years, and we caught them very late in their accumulation phase. They already had a number of residential growth assets under their belt, and we caught them late in the piece where they were actually in the process of acquiring their last residential asset, and then a few years later, aggressively selling that down for two fundamental reasons. The first one was to pay out their owner-occupied home loan, which they did, and then invested into a yield-orientated play with the balance proceeds, and effectively went out there and acquired at the time it was about a $6 million commercial property, multi-tenancy. It's now worth around 7.2 million and producing them over half $500,000 worth of cash flow.
Yeah,
and that's the beautiful thing, and especially working with some partners for an extended period of time. We didn't see them at the beginning of their accumulation phase because they bought their first property in 2003. But at least we've caught them towards the back end. We've seen the performance. We actually had the data behind purchase price, sale value, and to see, okay, well, buying good quality blue chip property over the long term, hanging on to the thing as best as you can, and then using the growth, then taking some of the chips off the table. Great, I'm going to take some of the gain. I'm going to, primary goal is pay down my own occupied debt, which they did, and then was able to go and buy a high yielding property with cash to produce over $500,000 worth of passive income, which is phenomenal. Not only to plan it out, but to also see someone walk the walk is really, really, really encouraging for some of the listeners.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's the dream for so many people, and that was actually the exact strategy that we mapped out, Joey. And guys, like in full transparency, when we did the strategy, like our house net income was about 500 grand, on goal for $1 million this year. So we're producing significant cash flow out of the business, and our primary wealth creation vehicle up to that point was business acquisitions, just because the cash on cash returns were so good. But like, okay, we've got to start getting chips off the table, but we don't need income. Like we've got enough income. So it's like, how do we get money tax effectively out of the business and put it into good quality blue chip residential real estate and build up a base of that residential real estate with the intention over the next 5 years to then be able to go and acquire a multi-tenant commercial asset that's then going to give us the cash flow on top of that. And then ideally hold all of it for as many property cycles as we possibly can, but have the option to then consolidate, sell down, pay off principal place of residence, pay off the commercial, and then live on $500,000 a year of passive income. So
that's the dream, right? Yeah, exactly,
playbook.
exactly. It is, and having worked with many buyers agents, with obviously Josh is one of our absolute favorites who work with many of self-employed and business owners. What I usually see is that kind of that conflict between mortgage broker and accountant, because they both serve two very different parts of the puzzle. One is trying to minimize tax and show the least amount of income on the books. The other guy is trying to show the most amount of income to increase the serviceability so that we can get into the next acquisition. And we always just want to make sure that we can get our trusted advisors harmoniously on the same page and go, guys, you work for me here. This is what I'm trying to do. Now, can we please solve this? Appreciating that they both come from very different fields and have very different objectives, but ultimately they're there to serve you. So we want to make sure that we can get them aligned and that they understand your goal. Because if they don't understand your goal, well, then yes, they're going to do the best thing for you, in that the accountant's going to try and save you the most amount of tax, and the broker's going to try and push your serviceability as high as they can if you want to keep acquiring. But being really transparent with them both, getting them aligned, and making sure they understand what your goals are, we have found as a key critical element to success for the business owner.
Well, that's where game plans bridges the gap, in my opinion, because it basically gets everyone heading in the same direction towards executing on the plan. It now gives us context. Because, of course, you should minimize your tax if you're not working towards any strategic acquisitions, right? And when we know that, okay, we've got to buy this property or two properties this financial year, and this is our profit target that we need to keep the bank happy, then, okay, how do we optimally structure that from a tax perspective in order to achieve that goal? It gets everybody singing off the same song sheet and heading in the same direction. And because this is the most common complaint that we get from business owners, is like, okay, I've got all these professional advisors, but no one is on the same page. And I'm just like, shit, like what advice do I focus on? So I guess a little bit of a segue, guys. Aside from that being an issue, what do you think are the other most dangerous mistakes that you potentially see clients making when it comes to building their portfolio? So what are the bullets that people need to dodge when they're trying to scale a portfolio?
Yeah, I think given that the buyer's agency space has grown so rapidly over the last 5 years, what we are seeing now is like all different forms of marketing schemes come into play. And so I think, I mean, there's always been that in the background. There's always been someone who's, selling the dream of 10 properties in 10 minutes and you can retire next month type of scenario. But then, there's lots of fancy new ways of marketing now that tries to get people excited and is trying to, show you or tell you that there's like a secret that no one really knows. And it's this new, shiny object that no, let's get into these 10-room tenancies where you can sell it to like rent it out for uni students. It's a new way of doing things. And I think with all things, all investing, it's actually quite simple. The best type of investing is actually really, really simple, not sexy. And so I think the biggest mistake we see people make is getting distracted by the shiny object, being sold. They actually sit down, they have a plan, they put something in place, and then all of a sudden this quote unquote, one in a lifetime opportunity comes up and it's the next best thing to do. And they get distracted and they get, driven by this like sexy new thing that they really want to get into, and it derails them from what their actual end goal is. That's where we kind of see people make the biggest mistake. Other than that, there's different types of assets that kind of flow underneath property that people do make mistakes on as well. We've seen people do really well out of things like house and land estates and off the plan apartments. But as a general rule, the downside of those types of investing is if you're buying it, an off the plan apartment, let's say it's an apartment in a block of 100. Well, there's 100 of the same type of assets in your complex. So if someone's going through, the big Ds, whether it be death or divorce or something like that, and needs to, have a fire sale and sell it in a rush, you thought your property was worth 800K, but these guys are happy with 750 because they just need to get it done. Well, guess what? If your comparables is now that 750, that's all what your property's worth. Same thing with house and land estates. These builders and developers release land in stages, and so they might release 10 blocks at a time, and they sell you on this dream of getting into that one block, and you buy it at 500K, and then they sell so quickly they release stage 2, which is another 10 blocks, but now they're selling them at 550K, and you think, oh, I've just made 50 grand in 3 months, but it's not the market deeming those values getting higher. It's actually a developer going, oh, these sold quickly, let's increase the sale price on these assets. And then when you go to sell, the developers now sold 100 of these blocks, and they've all built the same cardboard boxes on each one of these things. So you step out your front door, you walk 10 minutes down the road, and it feels like you're standing outside the front of your own house again. Yeah, exactly. And so again, if your comparables is everything else that's the same around the corner, you can get derailed by those types of things. So I guess that comes down to an asset thing. But Joe, is there anything that comes to mind with you in terms of mistakes of the bigger portfolio?
I suppose that the one thing for me is not understanding one of those 3 pillars that we spoke about before. And the biggest one for me is borrowing capacity. And so not understanding and just jumping straight in. I'm sure I was guilty of this. I'm sure many investors were as well, because Game Plans wasn't around when I bought my first property. And if it was, and I would have kind of accurately structured in what my kind of blueprint looked like, I probably wouldn't have made some of the acquisitions that I did, but it was I can go and afford to buy this, so I am going to, and then not understanding the flow and effects and the ramifications. If you only ever had whatever it was, 800K of servicing, you would want to make sure it was the very best possible property that you could afford to go and buy. And then understanding that if you went out there and exhausted that, well, then capacity doesn't open up again for another X amount of years or until your income increases. So being really strategic and understanding the knock-on effect of making this purchase, because it fundamentally will impact it, sometimes positive, often negative from a borrowing capacity perspective, as you move from this purchase into the next one.
Makes sense. And I'm sure you guys see this, and look, not that any of our audience wants to achieve this, but we've all heard these stories of these people who've built these 20, 50, 100 property portfolios. Is there any secret that they're doing differently, or is it really just coming back to those 3 fundamental rules that you went through? Like, is there any cheat code to getting to that level?
Yeah, the cheat code is start a business and generate 10 million bucks a year in revenue, and pull out 2 million bucks in profit, and then go buy 100 of these things. But of the people that have 100 of these things, would I want to own 100 properties? Hell no. Like I've just with the small portfolio that I've got, the amount of issues, need to repaint, this pool pump's broken, the gate's broken, you got to fix this, you got to fix that. Like, it's a headache enough for me. I could not imagine having 100 of these things unless I had a full-time actual manager, not just a property manager, but someone who is like an extra layer to that. And that's a full-time role in itself. So when you're doing your portfolio cash flows, I'd forecast in another 80 grand a year just to have someone manage the portfolio for you. You know what I mean? And these are the things that people don't think about. And we see this with like someone like Steve McKnight, who was a big kind of mentor for me when I started getting into property investing. He used to have the book, 250 properties in 3.5 years or whatever it is, something around those numbers. His latest move, I think he did like 3 or 4 years ago, he sold everything and just bought 3 really strong commercial properties. And that's all you need. It produces more cash flow than his 250 property portfolio. He's only now really got 3 properties that he needs to address issues for and everything else like that. And on top of that, it's really the tenant who's paying for all the issues, the taps that are broken, and refurb and everything else like that. So it just makes it a whole lot easier. So I think secret sauce is have a business with a strong income that can get you there. There's no real way that you can get there on a typical page E income. And that's the honest, harsh truth. And that's the lie that I got sold as well. It's not sold, but like the thing that I thought I could do on a typical page E income. But you got to actually come down to the reality. 100 property sounds cool on paper, but is it something that I'd actually want to manage? Probably
No,
not.
it sounds like a fucking nightmare to me, guys. I couldn't think of anything worse.
And it comes back to your goals as well, right? Like, if you had a clear defined goal from the outset, you would find that after property number 6, you're probably already on track to hit your end outcome. So property number 96 is way more than you probably would have ever need. It's definitely going to be more debt than you probably want to take on. And it's going to be a lot more of a headache than you would ever have forecasted. Funnily enough, we actually pulled some data recently and we actually looked at our most successful investor on a circa $100,000 income. And their secret was, there is no real secret. They just stuck at it for a long period of time. They bought their first property in like 1997. They bought another one 5 years later, and they've been investing for like 2 or 3 decades now. That's their secret. Buy good quality property, hang on to it for the long term, and keep sticking at it. Even when they would have gone through recessions, GFCs, COVID, wars, this, that, and the other, they just kept investing within their means. I think they've got maybe 5 or 6 properties well on their way. They've, in fact, they've already hit their income goals. Their most recent purchase was about 4 years ago. But that's their success. Buy really good quality property and hang on. Keep on hanging on.
Yeah, it's funny that people are looking for these cheat codes, and it's super basic. Like my mentor when I was getting into advice was a multi-billion dollar fund manager. And his advice that he gave me, he said, Jackson, play with your partner, not your portfolio. He's like, stop looking to get your rocks off managing your money. It's not where you should be getting your kicks from. And he's like, you just got to make good decisions and just forget about them for decades. And I think this is obviously the biggest impact that I see to people's portfolio, not just in property, but shares and business, is being reactive, of just jumping at shadows and trying to just get too smart with it. Interestingly, and this is not throwing no shade, our clients who actually have modest IQs that don't think they're too smart, they're just salt of the earth people that are just fierce implementers, are the most successful. And some of my highest IQ clients are the least successful. And it's because they're too smart for their own bloody good. They're just like, there must be a way to game the system here. And I'm like, guys, like it's boring. There's no secrets.
Try and get too active. Try and get too pretty.
Exactly.
There's
It's not how wealth is built.
there's some horror stories in crypto, right? We hear about them all the time, but the most successful crypto investors are the ones who have lost their keys to their portfolio. They bought it 10 years ago and now they can't log in anymore. They can see it there and they can see what it's worth because they can't touch it like it.
Yes.
And that's the honest truth.
Exactly right. So let's do a little bit of a shift here, guys. Look, I'd be very surprised if there's no buyers agents in Australia that don't know what game plans is. But I do suspect that some of those buyers agents are like, well, I am a buyer's agent. I'm boots on the ground. I select the assets. I don't know how to become a property strategist. I've never done it before. So what's the path of least resistance for them to start adopting game plans into their business? Do they need to become a full-fledged property strategist to do this?
Not at all. For a long time, we kind of, had the train the trainer type of scenario where we'd have businesses come on board. We'd teach them how to use the platform. We'd help them map it out and get a good understanding and everything else like that. But, I've been very fortunate that Joey's been working with me for the last 5 years, pretty much since we started the business. And he's been an absolute weapon. And Joey used to work for a bank and he was on a very high income. So I was very nervous to bring him on board. But over the last 6 to 12 months, Joey's come on board full time. And the real purpose of that is head of strategy. And he actually delivers these strategies for some of the biggest buyers agents in the country. And that's probably our biggest service offering or differentiator than everyone else that's out there. We're not just a tool anymore. We are the facilitators. We help you deliver these strategy sessions for your clients. So even if you're starting out and you're just working with your first client and you're trying to understand what that delivery piece is going to look like, we actually recommend that you run at least your first 5 sessions with us and the team and sit on the sessions, understand how they get delivered, understand how we execute, understand how we map them. And for the most part, people just continue using us because we deliver such a good service. Yeah. You're spot on, Jackson. Buyers agents are buyers agents. They do the negotiation, they do the due diligence, they look at the individual property. Most people don't want to be strategists or aren't comfortable being strategists. And so most of the partners that we onboard now will just stick to us with doing the delivery of the sessions. And that's, again, works better for us in our favor and what we prefer than maybe someone who might not be as technical, trying to understand a very technical tool and, maybe pressing the wrong button and, something going off in a session. And then they feel uncomfortable, like, oh, I don't know what I've pressed or how do I undo this, and feel like they're not the expert anymore. So having, someone deliver that session with you who knows and lives and breathes the tool every single day, knows it like the palm of their hand, and actually improves the product. Like Joey has been so good over the last 6 months. We've been brainstorming a whole bunch of ideas and ways to update things. So he's actually in on the product side of things as well, heavily now, is just completely different to, doing it either on your own in an Excel spreadsheet or trying to understand a tool that we've spent 6 years building. And I tell you, Jackson, there's so many times that I've gone there's literally nothing I could add to game plans. It is done. Like there's nothing I could add to this thing, but It blows my mind, not only from a technological point of view with AI and everything else like that that we try and improve, but even just the modeling piece, like the things that we update from the modeling piece on a monthly basis is crazy.
Makes so much
And you're right.
sense.
We need to keep our finger on the pulse as well, right? Because everything's ever changing. Like we've got all of these forecasted changes with the budget announcement with CGT and negative gearing, and these are things that we're obviously going to need to look at and implement in on the platform straight away. But Jordan hit the nail on the head, right? We actually leave the BAs to do what their core product is, and actually go and acquire really good quality property at the best possible price for their client that meets their brief, and we'll look after everything else so that they can obviously have the confidence and knowledge that someone that knows the tool inside out can deliver a really good session for the client that gives them something tangible to walk away with, but ultimately just leaving them to kind of nail their core product, which is, like I said, they acquire the best possible property for their clients.
Makes sense. And look, you guys are in it every day. You see people from all different walks of life modeling different goals, dreams, and aspirations. Like, there's a big difference between having a plan and having the right plan. What where does this go wrong? Like, where do people potentially misuse the system? Or, like, we know a lot of people make their own tools in Excel and whatnot. We all love a good spreadsheet. Like, what's the difference between a good and a bad plan from your guys' experience?
Yeah, I think one thing with the marketing and agencies that I was talking about before is there's a lot of like copy paste. Like
Yes.
here's a PDF document of 5 properties over 7 years, and assuming that it's applicable to everyone, that's definitely a bad plan because it doesn't take your personal goals or circumstances into consideration. Um, when they are actually using a tool like game plans to build this out, it is hard to go wrong because we do put side guardrails up in terms of what you can input into the system. We have really good visuals on those constraints that we're talking about for around, savings, borrowing capacity, and cash flow. So we make it very clear and obvious. But I'd say if someone's using game plans and we're going to understand or look at what a bad plan would look like, is when a client comes to you and says, I want 10 properties. And it's the same thing. I don't know why I keep talking about crypto, but it's the same thing of people going, I need 10 Bitcoin, right? They just have this number in their head of like, that would
Yes.
be really, really cool. But in reality, if you're going to bet on something riskier like crypto, maybe 5% of your portfolio should go towards crypto. It's not 10 Bitcoin. And the same thing is applicable to your portfolio, right? It's not, I need 10 properties. It's, this is my goal and this is what I want to achieve. And so where we see a bad plan get implemented is a buyer's agent wants to appease the client. The client comes along, they've been marketed to, this is what they want. So the buyer's agent goes, cool, well, I'll put 2 properties in this year. We'll do one next year because, we don't know what's going to happen to the economy. Then guess what? It's going to be a boom. So we're going to put 3 properties in year 3, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And so they're trying to appease the client to win the client's business. But in doing so, you're actually going to lose respect for the client because guess what? When year 3 comes around and it's not a booming economy and they can't buy 3 properties, guess whose door they're going to come and knock on? It's your door, right? And so what is actually much more valuable to the client is going, cool, we love that you want 10. That's an awesome goal to have. But you don't actually need 10. Most people can achieve their goals in 3 to 5 properties. Let's understand what those goals are. I'll show you those 3 to 5 properties. And it's not going to be a 7-year window. It's actually going to be an 11-year window with savings and borrowing capacities and everything else that comes to play. And then guess what? You're going to achieve your goals in year 17, not in year 10, and retire in 10 years type of scenario. And it might seem confronting to the client, might seem, oh, this client, he's going to get scared about this scenario. But the amount of conversations that we've had in that circumstance where the client actually looks at you in awe, like a light bulb has just gone off and gone, oh my God, I can actually see that I can achieve this in a realistic setting with a 5% growth rate and a conservative rental yield and conservative borrowing capacity. And I can still get there in year 17. That for them is much more valuable than walking away going, okay, this is what I came to the table with. The buyer's agent just told me that I can do it. And then 3 years later, I can't do it. It's just a completely different conversation. The client will respect you a whole lot more from walking away from that conversation than just either the cookie cutter or yeah, sure, I can do whatever you want type of scenario.
Makes perfect sense, guys. Yeah, and I think this is about just owning your value proposition and not being an order taker, right? Because look, it's those types of clients who have this idea in their head and they won't be told otherwise are not the right clients. Like they're not ready. they've drank some other Kool-Aid and it doesn't align. And even in our business, like we turn those people away and we wish them all of the best, because unless it's the difference between ego and outcomes, you can only have one.
100%.
Yeah, and just seconding what Jordan said there, like the respect that the client gives some of the partners that we work with when they came to the mindset of buying a property year for the next 4 years, and we actually spaced the acquisition out and we put like a year gap or a 2-year gap in between them. Why? Because we're actually looking at your cash flow going, that seems heavy. That seems pretty heavy. You're actually probably better off actually not making an acquisition, and the BA doesn't come across as a commission hungry, greedy kind of business owner. They're actually going, well, I'm actually working in your best interest, which I think unfortunately sometimes gets overshadowed in the space or sometimes overlooked with some BAs in the industry right now.
Makes a lot of sense. Awesome, guys. This has been super valuable. So I'd love to just do a bit of a last piece of advice, last golden nugget. This is obviously 7 and 8 figure business owners who are watching this, who are looking to fast track their path to financial freedom. They've built a great business, they're optimizing, they're now looking to extract wealth so they can create that financial freedom faster. Jordan, what would be your last piece of advice to somebody watching this podcast?
I'd say you're actually in the best position that you can be, because for me, property started off as this way to exit the rat race. It's a way to get out of, the 9 to 5 and to invest and build the portfolio. But now, as I reflect and look back on my journey, property is actually a store of wealth. So you were in a very fortunate position where you've started the business first, you've got the high profits coming in, you've done well, you're successful. And I see a lot of business owners that, have that lifestyle creep. They're going on the 100K European holidays, they're buying extravagant boats and doing all the things, and actually leak a lot of that profits that are coming out. But if you have the ability now to invest and use property as that store of wealth for you, no matter what happens to your business, I mean, I think everyone at the moment is kind of going through these highs and lows of what's going to happen with AI. Is, employment going to be at 20%? Maybe I should de-risk my whole sell everything. I saw an article the other day, sell my whole portfolio and then rebuy in 2 years when everything's 50%. And it might happen. We all don't know. Like, we really don't know what the future is going to hold. And that's true in business. And so if you're in a valuable position right now where you do have high profits and you're working with someone like Jackson with those profits, use those profits wisely. Go and invest in something, store your wealth. So when that rainy day does come, which it will, it always does, you've got something to prove and back yourself to go through a period of that season and then maybe start a new business, or, maybe you do have to sell it in 5 years and the property's grown, but you can put those profits back into your business and keep the business going rather than be stuck in a sticky situation.
Great advice. Awesome. How about you, Joey?
Yeah, one thing for me, and I'm going to steal this from Josh from TradeView, and when we speak to business owners all the time, it's like you've worked so hard on creating this wealth engine in your business, but it's now time to think about creating that second source of income, that second wealth engine, so you can eventually turn this one off, because we don't want to be working on the business until the day we die. We obviously want to then enjoy some of the fruits of the hard work that we've constructed. So take some of the hard work that we're doing here, start to create this second wealth engine through property, such that we can eventually try and replace some of the income so that you can slowly turn this one down and then start to live off, some of the income that you've generated through property.
Love it. Fantastic. And look, my final note here, guys, is that obviously you're watching this podcast or you're reading the book because you're trying to equip yourself with knowledge, which is amazing. You need to have that knowledge so you can hold your professionals accountable and hold them to a standard so they can help you achieve your goals. But you can't abdicate responsibility, and you could also find yourself in analysis paralysis. So a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you put it into practice. Surround yourself with your board of advisors. You need a property strategist, you need a financial advisor, you need a tax advisor, you need a good mortgage broker, you need a good lawyer, and have these board of advisors driving you forwards and helping you accelerate your path, because you can't do it all yourself. So boys, I appreciate you making the time. This has been awesome, and we'll include all the links in the comments. Appreciate the time again, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Jackson.
Thanks, mate.
Take care, guys.